Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Coluccio, and you're listening to the Recruiting EQ podcast. Today's episode is called What is EdTech in 2026? What is the EdTech landscape in this fine year of 2026 of ours right now, which is already half over somehow, more than half over? We'll leave my paranoia about the time slipping way too fast aside. Today's special guests are Jess Thibault and Emmett Cullen of HireEducation. For those who are just listening to the audio on this, that's Hire, H-I-R-E, Education. I'm sure you see what they did there with that, which is a recruiting firm that specializes in EdTech. How are you guys doing? Thanks for being here.
We're good. Yeah, it's
doing great. Thanks for
enjoying the summer so far, or it just started like recently, but enjoying summer.
Yeah. Now this is my kid's first week of camp, so we're in it now, and it's it's great. Mm-hmm.
And I just moved to the mountains, so my summer is actually starting here in the middle of June. I'm still waking up in like 45, 50 degree weather and wearing sweaters.
Mm-hmm. Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The mountain man wardrobe is not the short t-shirts.
It's real.
Beach. Yeah. Got to buy a lot of flannel. You know what I mean?
I own like exclusively flannels right now. This is one of 3 shirts that's not a flannel.
I see. Well, thank you for wearing the non-flannel for the special occasion of the recording today. But that's okay. You can mountain man out anytime on this show. You have my permission and my blessing. Well, before we get too heavy into the topic at hand, if we can just go around the room and you can maybe tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do, starting with Jess.
Excellent. Sounds great. So yes, I'm the president and CEO of HireEducation, and our agency focuses on the EdTech sector, like you said, Rick. We recruit for director and above, so mostly that mid-career level roles, sales, marketing, product operations for the EdTech sector. And defining that sector, I know, is a lot of what we're going to talk about today, because it's actually, I say that all the time and people kind of look at me like, so you work for schools? And I'm like, okay, all right, let's take a step back. But yeah, that's a lot of what we do. We're a small firm. We've been around since 2010. I have been here for the last 5 years and purchased the firm from the founder a year ago. So we have a long legacy, excellent reputation and brand in the market. We're very well known, even though I have not been here since 2010. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jess. Emmett?
Cool. So I'm Emmett. I am a partnership manager here at HireEducation. That means I'm like a 360 recruiter. I've been here since 2022. This was kind of my first headhunting gig. And I absolutely fell in love with not only headhunting and the recruiting lifestyle, but also the EdTech world. It's a vertical in the corporate environment that is just like unlike anything else out there. And part of the reason why I've stayed so long. I really focus on leadership, sales, IT, and product positions within EdTech. And that's kind of what fills my cup every single day. So super grateful to be here and working in this industry.
That is awesome. Thanks, guys. Jess, you mentioned sort of your trajectory at the company, which I feel is a little bit unorthodox in a good way. But before we get into too much of that, can we just, even on a high level, define for people listening what is EdTech today? Like, what are some changes maybe that you've seen in that landscape, maybe since COVID or recently? How are you guys feeling about it?
Well, I mean, since COVID, that's like another whole story. I feel like it's been a wild few years.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about EdTech and why it's so hard to define is that it's not necessarily its own sector. It's like splices of dozens of sectors, right? There's a lot of bigger companies that have an EdTech focused product or service or team then. And it's I think also people often think that EdTech is just tech that interfaces with students, or maybe just technology that is supposed to help with learning or content delivery or online learning. But it's much, much bigger than that. And at least the way we define it, right? And I would say most of the sector defines itself by it's the vendors, it's the products and services that are built specifically for learning, whether it's for children or college, graduate or adults even. I mean, corporate L&D is, kind of at the far end of that. The thing that makes it unique, I think, is that it is tied to fundamental questions about, like, what are you going to do with your life, right? Like, what do we promise our children for the future, right? Like it's about people's livelihood ultimately, right? It's about employability. Why do we educate, right? Why? So that people can lead fulfilling lives, right? So people can contribute. But ultimately that also comes down to just, being ready for careers of tomorrow, which is, a question nobody really knows how to answer right now as far as what are the jobs of tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely learning focused, but there's also, a whole aspect of it, there's student safety, right? There's transportation, there's food services, there's payment processing, there's HR software, there's student information system software, right? I mean, it's just every single aspect of learning has specialized tools for it because that whole learning space is so unique. I mean, it's I think a good analogy is that it's much like healthcare, right? I mean, healthcare, health tech, med tech, right? I mean, everything has to be kind of built specialty for delivering healthcare. And I mean, that's how learning is too. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. So like the thing that I find super interesting about EdTech in general is that whether it's for schools, like from an early age, students of an early age to colleges to learning and development or like leadership programs and all this kind of stuff, it is one of the only products that I can think of, software or otherwise, that is by definition kind of this aspirational thing where you're projecting your better self into the future, which doesn't seem like there's any other product on earth that's that, in my opinion, right? Like this is 100% like you're going to spend time doing this and interfacing with this software. And on the other end of it is a better you that's going to do different things and whatever, which is perhaps something that I think got lost in the shuffle a little bit in especially the corporate world, where that disconnect between colleges and the job market. There's a lot of cynicism on the part of people, business owners, candidates, graduates. How do you feel that that's evolved, or how is the EdTech space sort of either responding to or interacting with that kind of landscape that we're in? Kind of pre-COVID, it was getting there, but post-COVID, especially, or during and post-COVID, it seems like there's a lot of that cynicism on all sides.
Yeah, and we've seen a huge increase in this kind of a flavor of workforce development, right? Workforce and workforce development is also a very broad spectrum of services and products and needs. But absolutely, the employability of a college student, particularly with the rise of student debt, is under scrutiny, right? It's causing a major identity crisis in higher education, not our firm, but higher ed in general.
With the GH.
Yes, exactly, with the GH. And we've seen a lot of technology companies and tech-enabled services bloom out of that, need, right? But so I don't know that there's a answer yet. But absolutely, it's a huge focus right now for, both the private and public sector that are kind of involved in that. But we've seen a huge rise in programs and government funding. That's the other thing that's interesting about this sector, is that even though there is a lot of private education, private foundation money, and universities, a lot of private universities that have tuition income, for the most part, government funding still highly affects the sector at all levels, primarily K-12, but at all levels, absolutely.
you feel like the type of like pieces of ed tech that get funded has changed a lot because of just various changes in government, what they're interested in and what they're funding? Not to get too political about it, but do you feel like there's a lot of an up and down because of that factor?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've seen some huge shifts. I think there's a lot of companies that people thought would be around forever that are shrinking or, no longer really viable companies, or, kind of went the acquisition route because of shifting priorities. I don't know. I mean, I'd actually be curious your thoughts on that, what you've noticed.
Yeah, I think there's a good example that I can think of. We worked with quite a few science of reading clients over the last couple of years. There was a lot of money going towards science of reading, which is extremely important. And the results of that, I mean, you can kind of see like Mississippi and some of the other states have great reading scores because of that. But though that money is no longer being allocated towards science of reading, so those companies are no longer growing. So that's sort of like a political shift that we saw in real time that really tampered on the growth on a lot of literacy focused companies within the sector. So stuff like that happens often right now. Like the way it is workforce development and math.
Interesting. In math, like on an algebraic conceptual level, or even just computational math? Do you know because I mean, you'd figure that people would just be like, hey, Claude, calculate everything for me from now on by, and then just like leave forever and never do bookkeeping or whatever again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely in that vein of like, hey, we needed to get reading scores up, so let's throw money at that problem. And now it's, hey, we need to get those math scores up now. Let's throw money at that problem. So
yeah. And that raises an interesting piece of this sector too, is the assessment piece, right? So much of what dictates what spending happens is based on these elusive test scores, right? And then there's a whole industry around the testing industry, right? So I mean, that's another very unique, along with like compliance and stuff. And it makes it definitely shift dramatically at times when, powers that be decide that one particular indicator of learning is lacking. Thus, this is now what we're going to focus on.
Has there been, so have you guys noticed, like, obviously during COVID, everybody was trying to like teach from home. Parents, a lot of the onus fell on parents to teach their kids, but now it feels like a lot of people are back to work, at least on a hybrid level, back to school in schools. At least that's the appearance to me, who doesn't interface with that community just from news headlines. Is that kind of the thing? Like, are there a lot of ed tech tools for in-class learning that are popping up now that kids are back in school, or how does the home to in school part of it affect things, if at all?
Yeah, COVID was such an interesting time because there was a massive amount of both investments from, funds and just kind of, the general and banking world, and government funding poured into education. And so absolutely we saw a rise in, like, for example, tutoring. Right, there's a ton of money poured into tutoring to try to close these learning gaps that we know COVID created, right? But that, for the most part, has sort of gone by the wayside. It's interesting. Tutoring actually splits into two different categories because there's government mandated high dosage tutoring for students that are on the tiers of intervention, right? That basically they have IEPs or 504s or something, right? There's some reason why they have mandated services. Those companies are doing just fine, right? And they're growing, and that's great. But this sort of, let's just have college students or AI or, people abroad tutoring our students to make sure that they catch up. Like, that's kind of gone. It kind of came and went, right? And I think a lot of, because at least there was a lot of articles and news coverage about like whether or not it was actually effective. So like, that's one example of something that just kind of seemed to go boom and bust.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say that in the recruitment world, anyway, in the rec to rec world,
Mhm.
we're seeing in recruiters and salespeople, and also outside of recruitment, salespeople, that learning and development sort of doesn't exist in most companies anymore, where it did before.
Mhm. Mhm.
Everybody, half the people I knew that were in L&D were fired and not replaced, and are not in the industry anymore, and do something else altogether.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's been happening for 6-7 years. Even it was a little bit happening before COVID, and it's been since COVID too.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
on the flip side now, everybody who wants to hire someone who's got like 2-3 years experience, they're like, huh, these people don't even know the basics of what to do or
Yeah.
whatever, and they don't feel like
Yeah.
people with 2-3 years experience. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, maybe if everybody didn't collectively fire all their L&D people and get rid of their L&D programs and not
Mhm.
replace them with anything and just kind of pray and hope during COVID, then maybe the
Yeah.
people who got hired during that time would have proper onboarding and training. Like, do you, is there a feeling that the
Mhm.
chaos of that COVID period, that we're coming out of it where there is just isn't enough trained staff out there, that people are going to have to lean more into EdTech tools to sort of train people up quickly, to kind of compensate for that gap? Or has that gap not really hit yet in that way?
There's so many layers to this conversation.
So many.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So there was the rise and the fall also of boot camps, right? And so
Right.
that
Yeah.
kind of, and that predated COVID, right? And
Sure.
it bled into it. But for the most part, like that, so I mean, that's kind of its own conversation, but like that was an element too, where it was like, hey, look, let's, fast track upskill, right? People in certain areas. And again, like I'm just not sure it was like particularly effective. But I mean, what you're saying about L&D going away is huge issue. And the kind of the people who I know in our network that work at like a government level on workforce development, or in major nonprofits and stuff, I've actually heard them say that it way predates COVID, and
Oh, yeah.
that it's more about, I think, tightening economic conditions. So maybe even really early 2000s, and basically corporations started reducing their L&D functions. And I think this also goes along with the trend of employees do not stay with their companies for 30 years anymore.
Right.
And I think that there's a little, I'm not sure where the chicken and the egg is there, but like, it was kind of like, oh, well, people switch jobs multiple times now, right? You're not here for your life, but also your company's not loyal to you. So like, why would you be loyal to the company, question, right?
Yeah.
But I think that also kind of fueled this like, well, if you're not going to be here for 30 years, why should we invest in you? But for whatever reason, I mean, the overall trend is that absolutely, like this idea of you started a company and they're going to invest in you and you're going to dedicate yourself to them is kind of gone by the wayside. And so it's interesting, like at a national level, when I hear people speak on panels and conferences about these workforce issues on a really large level, it's corporations are like, where's our workforce? Government, like you need to pick up the pieces. But the people who are really paying attention are like, what are you talking about? You're the ones who got rid of L&D.
Yeah.
Like, why is this our problem? Like, no. Like, and so I think it's also just, again, economic pressures, right? There's efficiency is king nowadays on all levels of everything, right? And so I think, kind of not wanting to invest in employees that could leave or may or may not work out, right? It's like everyone wants a hole-in-one, everyone wants a sure bet. I mean, that's true right now in the investment world too. I mean, we work with a lot of really healthy, thriving, exciting startups, but I also mentor a lot of founders through various organizations, and there's no funding. They have to prove it all ahead of time, right? They have to be revenue positive before anyone's even going to look at them, right? It's just there's these tightening conditions, I think, across the board, and it absolutely is a huge concern. So kind of the end of this very large conversation, we could go in so many different directions, I think, is actually the rise that we've seen is in experiential learning. So I think it's partly because of the failure of boot camps. I don't know if I can actually make that claim, but in my mind, those two things are correlated, because boot camps were really about like very isolated learning, right? Yeah. Very independent online learning, not a lot of on the job, not a lot of feedback. You know, those were kind of the criticisms of them. And obviously there's great ones too, but I think there's this huge push now that, especially in industries where the workforce is the most lacking, right, has the greatest problems, a lot of those industries are actually fairly hands-on. And it's the opportunities for internships and experiential learning are ripe. And so I think experiential learning has become, I think, less of like a fluffy nice to have. And people are realizing like, oh, no, actually, this is how we have always trained the workforce. Like
totally, right?
After the dawn of time, right? Like this is how you learn as an adult who really needs that. Now, how that's going to filter to kind of bigger tech and stuff, I don't know. But we've seen it, I think in project management, cybersecurity, I think really physical, the trades, obviously, I mean, they never really left the whole internship experiential learning models. But, I think it'll kind of keep growing in other ways. But honestly, that's what we've seen grow, which has been really exciting. I mean, those are such exciting missions. Like when we work with those companies, it makes our job so much fun.
Yeah, luckily for me, I have a few of those clients in my book of business. They're all, virtual reality, mixed reality, 3D simulations, that type of stuff. Cool. It's really, really cool to be working with companies like that are on the cutting edge of technology, really.
There was this couple of gentlemen I was speaking to early a couple of years ago who were game designers, and they were talking to me about how they were trying to move all the game designers that they knew, because the game sort of bubble burst like kind of during COVID, and there was no work anymore in like 2023 onward, 22 even onward from what they were saying. And they wanted to sort of pivot people toward education and recruitment. And it kind of sounds like what you're talking about though, right? Like if you're a 3D designer for games or whatever, well then you're a prime person to make almost like experiential learning almost feels gamified in a way, what you're saying.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's whole bodies of research on the gamification of learning and pros and cons. I mean, that there are multiple professors at big universities that is what they've dedicated their life to researching. It is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I also, just from the recruiting angle of things, I am constantly talking to people about how Gen Z is sort of mostly opting out of the traditional workforce. So they're like choosing to do gig economy stuff or be self-employed, be solopreneurs, and or travel a lot, work here and there. What's that?
TikTok,
yeah, TikTok, Instagram influencers, and very starting an Etsy kind of thing, right? Just to make some money. And here, certainly in Canada, I've heard from a lot of people in teaching that it's like they'll sign up, they'll go to school, they'll get certified to teach elementary or high school. They'll come in with their resume and they'll be like, okay, great, we need teachers. You're hired. Here's a regular classroom and a full-time job. And they're like, no, I just want to be a supply teacher. I'm like, what do you mean you just want to be a supply teacher? Yeah, I travel, I have my Etsy, whatever. This is just what I'm doing to get me. So it's the weird reverse of what we saw in the workforce, where those things would have been the sidebar income that was less expensive. This has been a trend for a while where it's like, no, I have no intention to be tied to a classroom and get to know these kids and get emotionally attached to all the things that teachers wanted to do before. I just need supplemental income, so I want to teach them occasionally. Is this a thing that is like, it feels like tectonic plates culturally shifting, right? To figure out like how does this all come together? I have to imagine that this opens a bunch of new opportunities for EdTech to try to fill gaps in all of the above. No?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen too much of it. I think the EdTech sector, for the most part, is built around the traditional institutions.
Right.
I think as the institutions are very slowly adjusting. I think
I
we're
see.
seeing more innovative, solutions and companies and stuff spring up. But I think it hasn't quite reached us yet. I don't know. Emmett, do you have a different perspective?
No, I don't really. I think a lot of ed tech companies were hiring folks right out of college, or teachers from the classroom with little corporate experience. Certainly during the COVID boom, we saw tons of that. And then after the COVID boom, that does not seem to have continued. And kind of what we were talking about earlier with reducing learning and development in these companies, I don't see that continuing at all. Like from a specifically like what we do, our ICP is sales in ed tech. That's what we do the best. We barely work on BDR or SDR searches anymore. Barely any companies are hiring or filling those positions, and they're relying on their senior account executives to get the job done, people who have 10 years of experience. So I think the younger generation is like, just like all the other headlines are going to say, they're going to struggle to get their foot in the door in a lot of places. It's a crazy time.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's an interesting gap, right? There's a gap there, but then there's a gap for them to sort of manage their life or be teachers maybe in a supply way that meets their travel needs and so on and so forth. But then there's also the really senior end too, right? There's a massive glut of age bracket in North America that's going to retire in the next few years, and I don't know that they have the succession planning to have to fill the gaps. Forgetting that AI is going to take some jobs away, there's no chance that we have the succession planning to fill the gaps of these more senior roles, which also feels like a big potential wave in ed tech that's still to come.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I don't see a lot of that happening. It is happening at larger companies, I will say. But then, then they're going to suffer from brain drain, right? Because if they're the only ones upskilling people and teaching, sales, for example, it's going to be a problem. I will say too, though, I mean, absolutely, Gen Z has the trend that you're talking about. I would say too, though, I mean, I think there's a flip side of that, though, too, that there are Gen Zers who desperately want a job and cannot find a job. And
100%.
I think we see more companies trying to tackle that problem of like, okay, how do we make you employable? How do we give you, increase internships, right? Increase that access to on-the-job training and kind of pathways. Pathways is a big, buzzword, I guess, right now in a lot of ways where, we sometimes have the privilege of we mostly work with ed tech companies, mostly software companies, but we occasionally work with higher education institutions. But we are usually brought in for one very specific role, which is somebody in workforce who is building partnerships between the universities and corporations, so the private and public sectors. And that is a fascinating trend, is all these universities who, are really trying to invest in that. And, often it's a very local thing, right? Like they just need someone who can make those physical local connections between the university and whether it's just sources of internships or whether it's, very formal large partnerships, right? Those projects are really fun to work on as well, because I feel like that's often filling this gap, right, of the Gen Zers who definitely want to work, and are trying to find some way in, some ramp.
Yeah, and I think it would behoove most companies to be thinking along those lines, right? Because again, it's just like the shortage of talent is real. Definitely people who are in the recruiting space feel it, and I speak to them all the time, so they're feeling it in many different industries. And the solution isn't to just constantly go out there with a perfect vision of who you want in mind and just reject everybody for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. And you know what happens is that I've actually noticed that the hiring managers who don't go outside of it, because they're, again, perhaps forced to, it's not always their fault, but they often get let go. And that's becoming a rumor now too, is that if you can't come up with a creative solution to do business and hire and make your company work, then you yourself are on the chopping block. You can't just sit around and wait for this. So like these pathways, like you're saying, are vital. I see every company having to go down that path in the next 5 years, or just stay by the wayside.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, so then I actually feel like, from what you guys are saying, that there's a few of these pretty like larger scale problems that haven't really even hit in the EdTech market response yet, which feels like for someone who would be getting into EdTech, it's actually probably due for a massive upswing in the next 4 or 5 years, because all of these problems are not going away. They're getting worse and the solutions don't exist yet. So it almost feels like a great time to get into a market that's probably about to skyrocket, because of just the urgency of the need of these things is going up pretty drastically, it seems like. Am I reading that right in your minds?
I think so, right?
In workforce, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely see the market pretty much going up pretty consistently over the next couple of years, because of, and specifically for recruiting firms like ourselves, companies need us more than ever to find that specific talent that they're looking for. Everyone is looking for a purple unicorn these days. They're all looking for 10 years of experience selling the thing that they've been selling for all 10 of those years. Very difficult to find. Despite all of this like learning development gaps and all that stuff, that creates huge opportunities for firms like us, because they're willing to spend the money to make sure that the ROI on that hire is perfect. So we are sitting in a very nice position, I think.
Yeah. Which is probably going to get better, I think, even.
Yeah. And I would say, in K-12 is probably the most rocky right now, but, there's the increase in, education savings accounts and kind of school choice movements. Honestly, that's just going to fuel growth in other areas, right? Whether it's micro schools or, just a pivot of some of the companies that exist right now. It's just a different marketing strategy. So yeah, I would say another trend that we've seen both in higher ed and K-12, but in different ways, is a huge focus on enrollment management, right? And recruiting students.
Right.
Because even public schools that, for decades were just like, kids just show up, they live in town, they have to come here. And more parents are like, nope, like I'm opting out. And public schools are, finally being forced to be like, oh, wait, do we have to market ourselves? Do we have to listen to our customer? And so that's been such a huge shift, right? And I think, so there's more and more solutions being sold, even just to public K-12 around recruitment, which is wild,
Yeah, that is wild.
It started with charter schools, right? And kind of that, a free choice, but more and more states are approving funding for, parents basically to opt out of public and are given money to go spend at private schools or micro schools or homeschooling. So, I think there's a lot of pressures. There's a lot of unhappy parents out there too. And a lot of that is just the state by state differences, both political, funding. If you just look at the disparity, the spanning, the wide spectrum of per pupil spending, town to town even, right? But definitely state to state, it's drastically different. And so students are getting very different experiences. And so, we've seen education movements come and go to varying degrees of success to try to hold some sort of standard, right? So that students don't get left behind in one location versus another. But this is another thing that's spurring this kind of school choice movement is, and I get that. And, I will say too, I feel like I'd be remiss not to mention kind of some of the big news articles recently about this backlash on EdTech and parents saying, my kid's going to school and you're putting them in front of a laptop 4 hours a day.
Right.
I can tell you, the schools that my children go to, that is not happening. But like, if that is happening, which I believe it is in other parts of the
Right.
country, like that's not acceptable. So like, what do we do around that? Because some parents are absolutely furious and they have a right to be, right? And it's like, tech isn't here to babysit, right? It's supposed to be more efficient and more effective, right? But the implementation then is a problem. So, I mean, there's kind of these cascading issues in K-12 right now. And I think the dust has yet to settle there. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it, right? Efficiency and effectiveness. And I feel like the workforce, anyway, is still very efficiency obsessed. Maybe not just because of Elon Musk, but he's one of many very popular voices that use the term efficiency all the time in the name of doing things that are completely erratic sometimes as well. And unfortunately, that's kind of spread. But I've found that people use the term efficiency in the workforce to mean short term. Like short-term efficiency. How can we make things leaner based on the way things are right now? And unfortunately, we're seeing some of that backlash, like AI layoffs. And then it's like, oops, sorry, we laid off 10,000 people and we need to hire back 5 of them real quick, 5,000 of them real quick, because we totally messed it up. And I feel like we're at the precipice of going into an era where effectiveness becomes the bigger game, right? And I hope that that's the case, because a lot of these problems that you guys are describing, they're coming to a head, but the dust has not settled yet. They haven't reached maximum urgency yet, where people go, okay, whoa, we have to stop what we're doing and actually fix this problem. And they all seem to be coming to a head around, hopefully around the same time, which will be a rough time. But I don't know. Do you guys see the same thing, that at some point it's like, look, this tipping point will happen, and then we'll have to be more effective about all of these problem areas that we're seeing right now?
I mean, I think it's a likely scenario that's what's going to happen. Just given all of the market pressures from the political side, from the family side, even internally, teachers are unhappy across the board. Like, things do need to change in some capacity. But I think things just move so slowly in education overall that it's gonna take a while to get to that tipping point.
Right. But it's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming in a good way, because I think the bigger the problem, the more solutions-based companies are going to thrive and possibly explode, right? Like, that's when certain people come onto the market and bam, they become huge. Like Zoom was there for COVID, and Zoom became the biggest thing since sliced bread, and now nobody cares, right? But
no, exactly. I think, that's another dynamic that's so interesting about our work is, and I imagine this is the same for you, Rick, being a rec to rec recruiter, right? Is like so many of the companies that we are working for and the larger issues, culturally or nationally, that are economically, that are impacting our sector, like, are workforce issues, right? It always feels very meta, right?
Yeah.
You're like,
100%.
well, let's hire the people who are going to fix hiring or fix training, right? Or kind of make it possible for people to even get jobs in the future, right? I actually like that aspect of it too. It's kind of fun.
I do too. It feels like you're like a layer removed from the actual doing of said job, and getting to see all the people's sort of problems and helping them collate that information to solve them en masse as much as possible.
Yeah. I think that's my favorite part, is hearing about so many different companies. I mean, we have clients that are tackling very similar issues in completely different ways, right? We have clients that sell products that are super similar sometimes, but the companies are structured so differently. Their strategies are so different. And I enjoy that too. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely not a boring space.
No.
Lots of change and heated emotions on all sides all the time. Jess, I want to touch on your trajectory at the company in particular, because I think it's an interesting and unique story. Would you mind sort of outlining some of that, even just your background in general before getting into higher ed?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that is why I'm so passionate about the sector, for sure. So I went to college for economics, basically. But in my senior year, I made this kind of bizarre, looking back on it, pivot where I was like, I'm going to go teach. And I think, honestly, I think a lot of it was this sort of sense of like, I want to make sure I have a job, right? I mean, that is still reality. It's reality for all college students, right? But anyway, so I went directly into a 1-year intensive master's in education program to become a middle school science teacher. And I was a middle school science teacher for 6 years. I took a break, did some entrepreneurship, traveled a whole bunch, kind of in the middle there. But so 6 years in public ed, and then I switched to a private school, which is fun because, private schools they're more agile, they have more control over their own spending and stuff. And so it gives an environment that's a bit more entrepreneurial, right? You can kind of experiment, and there's not as much red tape and stuff like that. So that was fun, kind of scratched that itch in a different way. So I taught for another 6-ish years, and then slowly started moving out of the classroom, and became the director of marketing and communications for the private school. And I got an MBA at that time as well, because I really wanted to make sure I understood what I was kind of getting into, right? And so I finished my MBA, and I was like, I think I want to leave nonprofit work, because at that point I had only ever worked for nonprofits. And even in high school, right? I mean, volunteering for nonprofit. I mean, it's just like, it was the only thing I really knew. And so I looked around, and I actually thought I wanted to move into EdTech, because I had been a huge user and proponent of educational technology, throughout my years in the classroom. And so I started looking around and stumbled upon this recruitment firm that, recruited for EdTech, and they were looking for a person to lead marketing for the firm. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. Like, it feels very bridge, right? Let's take these skills that I have, what I'm doing, and apply it to, an agency that is, at least adjacent to the space I love. I got here, and, I was the VP of marketing. We did a rebrand, we did our website, we did a whole bunch of stuff. We moved our SIS system, right? I'm not a very normal marketer, that's for sure. Like, I was like, we need a new database. Let's re-architect this. Like, I have no metrics to help me with my marketing, basically is what it came down to. So
right.
We did all that. But then it was 2022, and our sector was going bonkers, and we had way too many open recs for what we could reasonably get through. And so I started recruiting for our marketing roles, because I had gone, kind of been a fly on the wall for all the training and stuff. And I was like, hey, I think I can do this, right? I can speak marketing. So I filled a bunch of those roles, and then I was basically hooked, and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of fun.
Yeah.
So then I started, and I've kind of done everything in the business now. I mean, there's been points in time that I'm exclusively focused on business development. There were points in time in the last 5 years where, I was focused on just kind of up-leveling our client relationship kind of SOPs and stuff, and, how do we do good account management? So had a lot of different roles in the company, but our sector kind of froze up in like the end of 2024, and it kind of there was some internal shifts, and it basically opened this door for our founder to, say, hey, I think I'm going to try to sell the agency. And I was like, well, I would like to buy it. So
love that curveball.
So I know. I was like, and I've always had businesses, right? I mean, I've always been entrepreneurial, and I had done every function within the business, right, basically at that point. It felt like a very natural next step. And I felt like too much of my own fingerprints were on the company that I didn't want to walk away from it. It was kind of the sense that I had. So thankfully my husband was up for the risk, and here we are. But so it's been actually, I think today, June 25th, when we are recording this, is exactly 1 year since we
get out of here.
signed all
Happy
the papers.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Wow, that's perfect.
Yeah.
You didn't plan this at all, I swear. But yeah, there you go.
No, it's perfect.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. So it's been a good year.
I love that because you really don't hear that very often, at least not in my space, like within recruiting agencies. And part of what is so unique about that story too is that, especially pre-COVID, the perception was that people who were teachers or who worked in nonprofit or who worked in marketing weren't going to succeed in recruitment. Straight up, I'll tell you this too. These were all three things that it was like, yeah, no, especially all three of them, which you absolutely had. And I come from being in the music business for a while, and I have a lot of friends in marketing, so I've sort of not really subscribed to that theory, but it was popular among hiring managers that was a thing that people thought. But I also think that it's because a lot of the older metrics in recruiting agencies were not qualitative. They were quantitative. So it was just like, just shut the hell up and make 1 million phone calls. I don't care what you say, just call people. And if that was the case, then people who are coming from education, nonprofit, who care about language and care about quality and marketing, like that specificity, they didn't want to hear it from these people when they were starting. So I think that's part of why that was the case. This has flipped. Now I get people who are like, look at people who were teachers before. They have great people skills. They know how to put up with a lot of crap. You know what I mean?
We do. This is true.
It's changed a lot. So how do you feel specifically, Jess? And then I'd love to hear from you too, Emmett, on this. How do you feel that your background changes your approach, or like, what do you feel like you're bringing to the table as a producer in recruitment, but as the CEO president of a recruiting agency that come from your unique background?
Yeah, that is so interesting to hear your perspective on that shift, because I was not here for that shift, but it makes complete sense. I mean, when Mark Phillips, our founder, decided in 2021 that he was going to hire a marketing person, that wasn't really a thing, right? Like, I feel like people weren't really doing that. And he just kind of, I think he had probably seen it done, heard it, right? He always had his finger on the pulse of recruiting, and I think could sense that, like, this was going to be important, right? That communications and brand especially were going to be really key. And especially because he knew he always wanted to sell the company eventually. He knew he wanted to build something that would outlast him. That was always been his goal. And the problem with so many recruitment agencies is that they really are about one person and one person's relationships. So, there was an aspect of his whole strategy that was like, we need to, keep building this brand. It certainly existed before, but like, we need to emphasize this. And it worked. I mean, one metric we were tracking for a while was, where are the referrals coming from, right? Are the referrals still only going to Mark, or are referrals going to other people, right? And so that was a metric that we tracked, and it was great. Over a few years, it did shift. So, I think, but we have always been very relational, very referral based, right? I mean, I don't think we've ever really been that, 200, 300 dials a day type firm. But also, like, honestly, when we've tried that approach, it doesn't really work in this sector. And so I think, to your question, as far as, the skills, the transferable skills and all that, I think because of the sector that we are in, it is highly relational, and it's very referral based. And so the most impactful thing we can do for our company is to go to conferences, right? To have conversations, to message things properly. I mean, this sector can smell an AI generated message miles away. I mean, just zero tolerance for anything that does not feel authentic. And I think, it's an interesting nuance of education. I think everyone in this sector is very mission oriented. Our sector in general pays slightly less than you would in big tech, even for people doing similar jobs, right? People are here because they believe that we should try to provide a better future for everyone, right? Both, those entering the workforce, those trying to upskill, those coming out of prisons, right? I mean, there's a whole piece of our sector that's about, incarcerated education.
Right.
So, I mean, there's just, on the whole, it's even the privately held companies have a deep sense of mission. Sometimes they're B Corps, right? Sometimes they're public, beneficial corporations, stuff like that. So, it's interesting. I feel like this is always like, I feel like I say this a lot, but I always don't want it to come across as like super soft or something. But there is an aspect of this sector too that values human decency. Honestly, I think that's the best way to say it, right? Like, people generally speak kindly to each other in this sector. And that, I know, in general corporate America is not true. Yeah. We have candidates that leave the sector all the time and come right back. They're just like, I literally cannot believe the blatant whatever, misogyny, racism, just like, and to that comment also, we can kind of be in a bubble, right? Like, EdTech is kind of a bubble, right? And it is interesting when people leave and are just like, wait, people are not just basic human. Like, there's no common decency out there. Like, there's no human decency. It's just like, this is not okay. And so there pros and cons to living in a bubble, I suppose. But
yeah, for sure. And I mean, there are decent humans out there, but it's not a given, right? That you're going to be spoken to with respect or whatever else in the job market at large. Like, it's a flip a coin and see what happens kind of vibe. Emmett, I know you've got to hop off in a moment as well, but I just wanted to get your take on, like, a lot of people ask me when they're looking for another job, one of the main things they talk about isn't money first. It's often impact and making a difference. And I would imagine that working with a leader like Jess and in this space, that's more at the forefront. Not that you can't make good money there too, obviously, but that's more at the forefront, and that's something for people looking for a bit of an impact. How do you feel about that versus other kinds of sales or recruitment or entrepreneurial opportunities?
It's a great question. I feel like there is a huge amount of opportunity to create real impact in this space. I mean, not just within our own organization, which is, obviously awesome to work for. That's why I've been here for so long. The EdTech world, like, when you're placing somebody, whatever they're selling or doing, they're impacting somebody else in the world that's learning or being supported in some type of way. So, like, for me, I placed, this is, very minimal, right, what I've done, but I feel great about it. I've placed a couple of people in those science of reading companies. Right. Surely they had some impact on those reading rates that have gone up in multiple states over the past couple of years. I get a tiny little small piece of that. That makes me feel good. So that fills my cup massively, and the money's good too. So it works.
Yeah, totally. I mean, to me, like I say, education is so aspirational already that it's like, if you're shaping the future of education, effectively you're shaping the future, period, to an extent.
Right. Yeah. And to Jess's other point, I told a founder at a recent conference who was coming from overseas. They were trying to break into the US market. I said, like, look around the room. Every single person in this room, filled with hundreds of people, has taken a pay cut, generally speaking, to work at this EdTech company. They can go take their skills and make 25, 30% more on their base salaries and commissions and bonuses at any other company out there. But they've chosen to work in this industry for a very distinct reason. And that's why I choose to stay here, because it's all mission driven and impact driven. People are helping other people here. They're not helping a major company save money. They're not helping a major company implement AI and take jobs. Like, they're creating real impact and value in the world, which is, it's hard to beat.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. You heard it here. If you're looking for impact, this is a place to look.
Excellent.
Well, that is pretty much our time, I think. Thank you both very much for being guests on Recruiting EQ. I think this is a super fascinating insight into what is a really hot topic often in the news.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thank you very much both to both of you
Thank you,
for being
Rick.
here. And
Thanks, Rick.
yeah, looking forward to seeing all you listeners next week. Thanks.